Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of PR Explored. PR Explored is a video podcast where we delve into trends and topics related to public relations and communications. I'm your host, 𝘶𝘭𝘵𝘪𝘮. I'm a public relations consultant and writer, and I'm very excited today to have with me my guest, Doug Downs. Welcome, Doug.
Michelle, I greet you the same way every time. I think I did that the first time we connected on like a Zoom call or something a couple of years ago. And for some reason I went, Michelle. So now that's just a habit.
Well, I appreciate it because you don't often get a welcome like that. So
Yeah, it's celebratory. Yeah, there should be more of those. Thank you for having me, Michelle. It's awesome to be here.
I'm so excited to have you because I am a big fan of your podcast, Stories and Strategies, and I'm a guest on your show. And so it's so fun to have you on my show. So I'm so glad that you're here. And I know about your amazing work, but I would love for you to tell our viewers and listeners all about the latest and greatest what you're up to.
Absolutely. So I'll start with the podcast, Stories and Strategies, just right as the name goes. And it's a public relations podcast using data from 𝘶𝘭𝘵𝘪𝘮𝘢. And according to Good Pods, we have the top PR focused podcast in the world. Just added a new co-host, 𝘶𝘭𝘵𝘪𝘮𝘢, Oxford educated. She's based in the UK. Just a remarkable person, but exceptionally intelligent, bringing on some fantastic guests. So we've already got good momentum. I mean, you've been on 5 times, Michelle, and every one of those was a terrific episode. And now adding 𝘶𝘭𝘵𝘪𝘮𝘢 just sets, we've hit the gas, right? We've hit the accelerator on the podcast and excited to see where it goes. Then the other part of what we do, Stories and Strategies, is also a podcast production agency. So we work with, just counted them up, 17 clients, most in the United States, some up in Canada, as well as Mexico, Australia, and we'll be adding some in the UK very shortly. So my whole world is podcasting 24/7.
No, and you are so good at what you do. And so I have been a guest on a number of podcasts, and I will say that you are hands down the best, most prepared host. And I really appreciate, you always are, you do a lot of work to prepare. And I think that makes a huge difference. So
My best ad libs are well rehearsed.
Let's see. So, as we get started, I just want to let people know you are welcome to ask questions, post questions. We will do our best to get to those. We probably will, we might save some till the end, but if we see some that are applicable to what we're chatting about, we might just jump in and grab those questions as we go. So feel free to post if you have a question for Doug about podcasts. We're going to talk all about why a podcast can help your PR and marketing strategy, what you need to know. And we will also touch on pitching guests to podcasts, because I know a lot of people that listen and watch are in PR and communications. And so a lot of their clients are wanting to be on podcasts. And so we'll talk a little bit about what makes a good pitch, how to stand out, because I'm sure that many people that host podcasts get inundated with pitches, and not all of them are equal. So
well, they are kind of equal, and they suck for the most part.
I've heard, and you're not the first person I've heard say that. So I think that's
dreadful.
why it's important to talk about it. But let's see here. Let's get started with a question, and I'm going to post it so that we can see. So why should a brand consider starting a podcast as part of its PR and marketing program?
Yeah, I'm a big believer that at some point in time, a podcast is going to become an expectation for large brands and medium-sized brands, just like a website. Just like today, it's ridiculous that you're in business, but you don't have a website. I don't know about the smaller, not necessarily someone who's hung out a shingle for public relations, a consultant, maybe not quite at the expectation level. But for the medium and larger brands, it'll become an expectation. And it's because increasingly trust is becoming the most important thing. And the one I trust the most is someone just like me. So when I'm going to choose a brand, I'm going to look for the brand that I believe is just like me. And for you and me, Michelle, I think it's a little bit different than, sorry, I don't think you're Gen Z, Michelle. If you are, that's awesome. Okay. But the Gen Zs and the alphas who are coming up and will start to assume more and more control, they want to know who you are and what you
Mhm.
stand for. So
Mhm.
building trust early on is going to become so important. And that's where a podcast absolutely thrives. A good episode is 30 minutes. Don't worry about trying to Joe Rogan yourself and go 3 hours. It's ridiculous. Joe Rogan is a unicorn. He doesn't exist in the real world. People, I don't even know if people really listen to 3 hours, not the majority anyway. But do a 30-minute podcast that's so much deeper than a social media post or even a thread. And people aren't just clicking like, they're spending 20, 25 minutes with you in that podcast. You start to become somewhat of a habit for them when they're on the Peloton every Wednesday at noon.
Mhm.
They know that that's when they put
Mhm.
on Michelle's podcast and listen to who Michelle's got. And maybe this episode doesn't stick with them, so they've got another podcast they listen to, or they want to go back a couple episodes because they haven't caught up with Michelle lately. You start to become that habit. You start to
Mhm.
become the preference. And that's why podcasts thrive so strongly at that trust level. And
Mhm.
that increasingly is going to drive decision making for more and more people. That's why brands should at least be looking at podcasts.
Well, you also shared some statistics that a lot of people are actually listening to podcasts, and people, even more people, say they would listen to a podcast hosted by a brand that
By a
they
brand.
liked.
Yeah. So
Mhm.
it's not just comedians, and it's not just true crime, and it's not just Dax Shepard or Mel Robbins, personalities that, yeah,
Mhm.
they will listen to what a brand has to say. Great example. I love the one McDonald's had a couple of years ago about its Szechuan sauce. And all they did talk about the Szechuan sauce, but they never tried to sell McDonald's as a brand. They just went to different communities throughout the country and talked to people about what was happening in the community. And then at the end, had them try the Szechuan sauce, which is kind of
Mhm.
spicy. And some people loved it, and some people they didn't like it, or they had other things to say. And that was the whole podcast. And it was just this community, this community, this community. And that
Mhm.
builds trust in the brand, which McDonald's is so good at.
Yeah, well, I think, they're probably struggling like a lot of brands are to keep people, keep their audience coming in, and so, I mean, they're probably looking for new ways to reach their audience, and I think that's, if you have not considered doing a podcast, it's a good thing to consider, so.
Yeah. And the irony is, I mean, you think, okay, well, McDonald's does it because it's a low priced option. Cool. I get, and sure, for the younger demographic, great. But statistically, podcasts appeal. 2/3 of podcast listeners are college educated and they make six figures or more. They're smarter and they make more money. They're a marketer's dream. Because if you think about the average listener, you hop on the Peloton, you take the dog for a walk, or you're commuting to work, whatever it is you're doing. Some
Mhm,
people listen to music. They have their Spotify playlist, right? Or their Amazon or Apple Music playlist, whatever they listen on. But then there are some people who decide, I'm tired of the music. I want to stimulate my brain, and podcasts are the way to do that.
mhm,
One of the ways to do it. And it's on demand. And I can pick who it is I trust. And I can listen to Michelle because I trust Michelle. So that tends to be the folks who have higher levels of education, and that statistically leads to folks who are making more money. It's a marketer's dream come true for advertising.
yeah, yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit about, a lot of people start a podcast, but then they often don't keep going with it. They quit.
Oh man.
So what are some of the reasons why that happens?
Statistically, 19 out of 20 new podcasts will quit within the first 5 months. And from what I've seen, at least half of them quit like 7 episodes in. And The best metaphor I can draw is it's like a gym membership. Everybody's all gung ho to join the gym. I'm going to be different, and I know people quit, but I'm in. And you go the first time, and you have a good workout. And yeah, that was great. And then you go the next time. It's a bit of a drive, but I'm good with it. I'm okay. And had to wait to get on a couple of the machines, but I'm all right with it. And then you go the third time and the fourth time. It's okay if I cut it a little short. I'm going to skip the fifth time because I've been good. I've been going, and it just starts to peter out. With podcasts, there's a whole list of reasons why people quit. Number one is it's way more work to do it effectively. You can do a podcast real simple. You can record a conversation with someone or with yourself on your phone and post it to your RSS feed. Bam, you got a podcast, right? You can do that. But to do it effectively, to plan an episode that has a story arc to it, because that's what people want, to niche your audience and their interests and be constantly listening to their interests, to promote your podcast, to create all that material, the social media posts, the blog post, write a newsletter for your podcast, to develop QR codes for your podcast. So when you're out and about, people, I've got one on a t-shirt. It says, ask me about my podcast. And I've got a QR code on the back. And I swear to God, when I go out to get a coffee or when I'm at the airport, I had someone ask me, or people holding their phone up to my shirt, because this guy's audacious enough to let people listen to his podcast. But to do all that, and then to do the analytics on your podcast, because just because it makes sense to you doesn't mean the audience that you're attracting are completely going with that. Are you going too long? Are you going too short? To pay attention to the analytics and see what your audience really wants, and to respond to that. By my estimation, it's 5 to 6 hours work, and that includes the editing and the planning and the promoting. It's 5 to 6 hours work for a 30-minute episode.
Wow.
It's, well, you know how much work you put into these things, right? To do it effectively. The other is, there's a term called pod fade, and kind of like gym fade, but pod fade. And one of the key drivers is podcasts are so slow to grow. You think you're going to get hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands of listeners right away, that you're going to build this audience right away because you are just as good as so-and-so. And maybe you are. Maybe you are. Maybe you're the exception and you've got that ability. But podcasts grow so slowly. It can take years to build an audience. And people just lose patience with that, because we're in this immediate results society where I want to look at my views and my impressions, and your downloads aren't measuring up to that. Those are two of the key reasons. And another one would be people, because I work with a lot of clients, people can overestimate their own skills. They're not as funny as they think they are. Their friends think they're funny, but they're not as funny. They're not as interesting. I've had clients who think they're Oprah Winfrey, and they think they can do that heart-tugging kind of interview and you know what? Oprah's got a lot of skill. She learned that, refined that over a lot of years to get to that point, and she's earned that from her audience. And it's a journey. It's a journey to get there. And then the last thing I'll add in is, they don't niche. They try to be, one of those most common mistakes is you try to be everything to all people. I was in Chicago recently, had a conversation with a couple of guys starting a podcast about addictions. Awesome. And they had both had a personal history with addiction recovery. And I said, well, who's it for? And say, well, anyone who's experienced addiction or is in the midst of addiction recovery. Awesome. Great idea. How many of those podcasts are there? There's lots. What makes yours different? Is yours about Chicago? Is yours about, not to pick on the South Side, but that's where we were at the time. Is yours about the South Side? Is yours about millennials in addiction or divorced and recovering from addiction? What is it that makes yours distinctly different from someone else's. You need to start with a sharp pencil to create an effective podcast. Riches are in the niches. And then as you grow, as I get clients who are 10,000 listeners per episode and start to get bigger and bigger and bigger,
Mhm.
that's when you start to broaden, because there's only so many in that niche that you're going to get.
Right.
That's when you can start to broaden. And that's when you become Mel Robbins, right? She talks about anything. That's when you can become 𝘶𝘭𝘵𝘪𝘮𝘢, who now talks way beyond, or Stephen Bartlett, Diary of a CEO. He hardly ever does it episodes about CEOs or business leaders anymore. He talks about anything and everything because he's reached that level where he can broaden. Don't start broad, start extremely narrow, and then broaden out as you get bigger.
That's a good tip. Yeah, I think from my perspective, I just feel like uh people might think it's a good idea, and then but they don't really understand the work that's involved, and they don't really understand the planning or the promotion, or that it takes time. And I mean, it's like a lot of other things. You just that you have to be consistent and be in it for the long haul, and overnight success is rare. So that's why I feel like it's not for everybody, I guess.
So yours, like you started yours, you had a social media. I won't mention the channel. I'm not sure you're still doing it, but you had a social media live stream that you were doing. You're obviously doing this one. So yours, you morphed that to include the podcast. So you kind of had a process to begin with, right? Do you think
Mhm.
that's something that helps if you have the beginnings of a process? Maybe you're familiar with posting to YouTube, you have a content creation background. Does
Yeah.
that help lead people to podcasting?
Well, I mean, I never thought I would have a podcast. In fact, I was probably in the camp of, what would I talk about,
I
right?
remember you saying that actually. Yeah.
Even though behind the scenes, behind the keyboard, I'm writing constantly. I'm posting on social media. I'm writing articles. I wrote a book last year, so, but I never thought this was my medium. However, to your point, I think I do have a background in content marketing. I have a degree in journalism, so my writing is kind of my thing. But what I do with the episodes now is I take the transcript and I publish it on my website, and then I can repurpose it in a number of ways. Of course, I can create posts out of it for social media. I can put it in my newsletter. It gives me a lot of stuff to work with, because even the conversations are so thought provoking for me, because I interview people like you who are I respect, who are smart and good at what they do. So it really helps me. That's my favorite part of this, is that I get to talk to people like you, and really it helps me just hone ideas that I might have, or like think about things in a different way, or I just think it helps me professionally, and I hope that other people benefit from the process that I'm going through as well. But that's
So
me.
that takes me back to your first question. Why should brands think about a podcast? Because it spawns into how many social media posts can you write from one
Mhm.
episode, right?
A lot.
Generate a blog. You could write a newsletter. You could write a few topics on the newsletter. Do
Yeah.
10 episodes, and you've got 10 chapters of an ebook, right? Hello, Chat GPT. Not recommending anything, but pump it through generative AI, refine it, of course, make
Mhm.
it you, make it the
Mhm.
UES you. But I like Gen AI for taking the first run at stuff if I instruct it
Mhm.
well in my style,
Yeah.
and then create some art. And you've got an ebook. People download the ebook, they provide their email to download the ebook. Hey, you're on my newsletter list.
Yeah.
That's all part of the ecosystem for why brands should think about a podcast.
Yeah, and I think, if you've tried a lot of other approaches, it's another thing that you can add to the mix, because
Omni-channel.
obviously
Yeah.
you don't want to just do things to do things. However, I think it's good to put something new in there once in a while, to try something new and shake it up a little bit. Because I mean, again, you made a point about you can only reach so many people doing, maybe one thing, or work, focusing on
Yeah.
one niche or whatever. So maybe different parts of your audience are paying attention to different things that you're doing. So that's why I think it's really interesting. And I mean, I just think it's fun to learn, and there's a lot of things that you can learn from putting all this together. But yeah, I think you have to approach it with the right mindset and the right spirit about it. So
Yeah, absolutely. And the commonality of finding people with similar values or like values to yours, or maybe someone whose values are different, and listening for, okay, where are the threads that connect us here? But maybe we're not completely different.
yeah, well, I mean, I think it's always good professionally to
Mm.
have those conversations because, I interview people sometimes that we don't always agree on everything, but I mean, I think it's food for thought because, you don't want to just get stuck in your little bubble and never entertain a new idea or a new concept. Especially if you've been doing what you've been doing for a long time, as we have. I will speak for myself anyway, but yeah, I need to kind of keep it fresh and keep coming up with I need to have different ways of thinking about what I'm doing. So,
It just feels like there's so much noise out there now. I mean, I wake up in my inbox, I have about 50 emails because I do subscribe to a lot of newsletters. I subscribe to the Michelle Garrett PR, is it right? That's one of them, and I read that faithfully. The others auto delete. No, but I wake up to so many emails. I've got responses to social media posts that I've made. Right, that the Europeans have had their day and they're nearing the end of their day by the time I wake up,
right.
and they've responded or they've initiated something on social media that I want to read.
Mhm.
But then all the, with Gen AI, all the content that's out there and everyone's joining this omni-channel universe, a podcast spawns into a million pieces. Well, those million pieces reach me so frequently that just more and more, I think people are trying to find a break from the
Mhm.
noise that they've already opted into their lives because
Mhm.
they don't want to exclude it. So that's another benefit of a podcast is I can put in my earbuds and I can make a choice. I can express, I trust this podcast. I've had a good experience with this one, or I'm going to try this new one. And that's a whole conversation. Why do people look for a new podcast and what attracts them? But I can go for this new one because someone recommended it, or that says something about how I feel right now. And they give it a go, and they if they pass that 60-second test, then they let it go for a few more minutes, and if they pass that test, they listen for 30
Mhm.
minutes, and then maybe they come back.
Mhm.
Maybe that becomes that. So I think it works in that space where the noise is getting so much louder in our lives that I'm just dying for some me time, some Dougie time where I can put earbuds in, tell the world to be quiet for a little bit, and just listen to what I want to listen to, laugh the way I want to laugh, or be a guest at the true crime podcast that I want to listen to, whatever that happens to be.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, we know those are popular.
Big time. Yes. Mostly with women, which scares me.
Right.
Women
That's the
love true
last thing
crime.
that I'm interested in, and given the state of everything is like, I don't need anything to feed my anxiety, but, I know that people love them. So, like,
It's so weird. Like if
that's
my
great.
wife and I are watching something on Netflix or Hulu, and it's like even something that's, someone's going to get shot here, she'll leave the room, right? Doesn't want to see it. But true crime, real new. Oh yeah, oh, what happened there? Yeah, she's all into that. So it scares me a
Yeah.
little
Yeah. Yeah. So, here's a question, and this is the thing for me, this has been
bit.
the
Yeah,
thing for a long time, is, there's a lot of podcasts out there,
yeah.
so are we really telling people that there is room for more?
Yep. There is lots of room. So depends on what source you go to. There's somewhere between, let's say, 4.8 million and 6 million podcasts out there. Spotify has kind of suggested there are 6 million. I think the podcast index, and you have to go in and put your podcast in the podcast index. And I know you've done that. Um, they have, I think it's 4.8 million. That's a lot of podcasts, right? Well, the world's pretty big, but that is a lot of podcasts. Then you look at how many of those are active podcasts. They've published something new in the last 30 days, at
Mhm,
least the last 30 days. It just crossed over. Hallelujah. We just broke the 400,000 barrier. That's less than 10%. 90% of podcasts are dead. And some are series. I'll give the series, like, that's fine. If you want to publish a series, that's cool beans, right? That's so I'm not calling those dead. Those are series that, but 90% of podcasts out there it's a zombie wasteland. It's full of dead podcasts that are out there.
Yeah.
And so, yes, people can find them. And some of them have like 40, 50 episodes. You might like them. I have clients who've decided to pause or stop. It just didn't fit their business anymore. But their podcasts are still up, and I can see it. They're still getting people that find them and listen to them. So in that sense, there's quite a few. But if you're looking for regular listenership, if you're looking for weekly listeners, bi-weekly is a bit harder, but if you're looking for weekly listeners, 400,000 podcasts, that's it, right? There's plenty of space. It's a big world out there. It's a big country. There's plenty of space for your unique idea. If your idea is just like everybody else's, if it's been done before and there is no unique niche, if you aren't the blue candy in the bowl of red candies, then you're going to get lost in the bowl of red candies. So blue candy, right? And niche that thing, find your audience because they just happen to be looking for you, and then let them help create the organic growth. They tell two people. And then as you get bigger, you can start to broaden out and you can become the best red candy in the bowl.
So you're saying, if I'm hearing you right, it's helpful to have your audience kind of going into it. Maybe you've built your audience, on social media or through your newsletter or whatever, so that when you launch your podcast, you have an audience ready to.
That's a great, yeah. So yes, yeah, that's all building audience, right? That's 2025. We're trying to own our spaces now. So yes, if you have a social media following, which you have a strong one, so you have a bit of an advantage that way. If you're starting from ground zero, though, that's okay. That's okay. Just be patient and invest the time, the energy, and the resources into growing it. And don't try to be everywhere all at once. Find where your audience is receptive to you. So yeah,
Right.
if you have an existing audience, that's a very powerful thing, right? I've worked with Hollywood celebrities, and their attention to their following is on hyperactive. They are so careful about what goes out to their following because that's their bread and butter. They are nurturing the heck out of that thing, and for good reason. They're nothing without it.
Yeah. No, that makes sense, right? Because I think when you go to your faithful, then they are gonna spread the word to new people and kinda do some of that work for you. So I always feel like that's the way you wanna tap in, and, I know with the book, that was really helpful because I had never
Yeah.
really planned to write a book, and so I had already been, pouring into my, my all my social media and all my writing, articles and things, and so that really helped because I already had people that, trusted me and looked to me for advice. So when the book came out, I think that helped a lot. And so I would think the same thing would apply to just about anything you're doing, and podcasts would be in that
Yeah, and
category.
I subscribe to your podcast because I know you. I actually never met in person, but we've met 6,
Yeah.
7, 8 times this way. And we've had just very real conversations even when the cameras and the mics are off. So that's absolutely the strongest way. Someone just like me, right?
Yeah. No, I know. I mean, that's the thing. And it's hard to keep up when everybody has a podcast, a book, a newsletter, it is a little hard to keep up. So that's why I still sometimes I'm like, wow.
So let me ask you, you've got the book.
Mhm.
There's AI now where you can turn that book into a podcast with a male and female voice talking to one another and I won't say absent of effect. It's not bad. It's I don't find it charismatic, but it's
Mhm.
not robot sounding voices. Where do you stand ethically on the idea of turning a book
Mhm.
into a series of podcast episodes?
Well, I mean, I'm okay with audiobooks. I haven't heard a lot about the what you're talking about there, and I
Mm,
I probably wouldn't do it personally, but I
mm.
mean, I know a lot of people are doing a lot of things with AI, so I think you just have to make those choices. Obviously, it's here, so, like, I mean, I think we need to figure out, what makes sense for us, as far as using it and
Yeah.
leveraging it.
And what society deems acceptable.
Well, that's the thing about it. I feel like it's very there's a there's it's a very, it's a charged issue. I mean,
Mhm.
there's the environmental side of it as well. So all these little figures that people are creating, it's like some people are not on board with that. Like,
Oh, the like an action figure. What's that's become a really common trend right now, the
yeah.
action figure yourself.
Mhm.
That's so
Yeah, not
cool.
everybody's thinks that's a great use of AI. So
Right.
that's just an example, but no, I mean, I feel like people just need to explore, like, with a lot of other things and just figure out what works for them, but yeah, I would do an audiobook probably before I would do.
One thing I'd love to talk about is the gender differences with podcasts. There's a history in that more men 15, 20 some odd years ago, more men started podcasts, so
Mhm.
more men listened. And I imagine men started this because they felt they had something to say. And
Mhm.
sweeping generalization, maybe more women were busy doing other things and the men had some time to try a podcast. But anyway, in 2025, podcasts do still skew slightly male in
Mhm.
terms of listeners,
Mhm.
but the average female listener listens to more podcast episodes than
Okay, that makes
right.
sense.
So to me, from an hours standpoint, I've never seen a stat on this, but to me, from an hours standpoint, it's pretty mixed. I think we need more women hosting their own podcast,
Mhm.
and beyond just women, more BIPOC, more LGBTQ, more voices,
Mhm. Mhm.
and not that that's a niche, but those are communities that can be built, and those
Mhm.
voices need to be included in podcasting. So I'm actually a huge proponent of that. In particular, for us, leaning toward women becoming more active in podcasting, which will lead to more women taking on leadership roles.
Mhm. Yeah. Well, I know in public relations, we see a lot of it's a women-heavy field.
Two
However,
thirds.
at the top, the leadership is not reflective of that. So, that's, I think, again, I'm super, of course, very pro woman, and I'm with you on
Yeah.
the diversity, the need for diverse voices and
Well, so
how
and
that.
how does that happen? So our podcast is a PR podcast, and I've seen the same stats. The stats I've seen are that the PR representation, at least in the Western world, is two
Mhm,
thirds women,
mhm,
and the one third men are the majority that are at the C-suite
mhm,
position.
mhm,
I can tell you 3/4 of the pitches that we get to be on our podcast are from dudes, which is cool. Some of them are great ideas,
mhm,
but that's pretty why men? Why are men putting their
mhm,
voices forward? I admire the confidence and all that, but I think we can do more to promote the confidence in women stepping up to put their name forward to be on a PR podcast, first of all, but also to take on leadership roles. And I
mhm,
just think that needs more voices, and it probably needs some male voices that are advocating for this too, because that I
mhm,
think that will help facilitate the way. And that's what we're doing with our podcast. Is
mhm,
we're trying to focus on 75% women, and it's going to be hard because so many of the pitches we get are from men. Like
mhm.
we're really having to focus on this.
Yeah. No, I that makes sense to me. I think another reason is that, historically, men are just better at talking about themselves, and I think one thing that I've tried to do as a woman, and also, on my own, I don't work for a company, I work for myself, I have a personal brand. I try to speak up, and talk about what I'm doing and why it matters, and, I think I'm trying to kinda set an example or just show that it's okay to talk about what you're doing. Of course, you don't want to talk about it in a really icky way, but sharing your thoughts or your approach or your successes or whatever. I think we need to do that as women. We need to be doing that more,
Yeah.
tooting our own horn a little bit more.
Yeah. So well, here we go down the path. I I I think I think men push out more. I think men broadcast more. We can adopt like a salesy, I'm going to capture that method of communication.
Mhm,
Whereas I think sweeping generalization, please. My experience is that more women are looking for the commonalities together. The communication is just different. I think
mhm.
women actually communicate better than men because they communicate more and
Mhm,
they're looking for, are you with me? Am I expressing myself in a way that you understand, that you agree with? And I think it leads to things like the verbal uplift. I find
mhm,
more women tend to end sentences on the uplift. And that is in part because you're looking subconsciously for, are we together on
mhm,
this?
mhm.
Um, yeah, whereas more men just tend to push out. Sweeping generalization, not to denigrate men either, because I think they're obviously, guys like Joe Rogan are phenomenal communicators, extremely effective at what they do.
Mhm. Yeah. I'm gonna put this up because this wasn't on our list, but we're just talking now about, do we need more women, as podcast guests and hosts? And I think,
So to
um,
that, as I say, the majority of the pitches for our podcast are for
mhm,
men. Now we've
mhm,
got 17 clients, and we also get pitches for those podcasts too. I
mhm,
can't say I have looked at it with that lens, but it's top of mind. It strikes me that the majority are also from men, or will often get the PR person, which two-thirds of the time seems to be female. I don't know from an
mhm.
email, but it seems to be women pitching for the male boss, for the male
Okay.
CEO. Yeah, but
Yeah.
I've never really done a count on that. But across those 17 clients that we've got, we get pitches all the time. So it seems to be mainly men pitching themselves to be guests, which is
Okay.
it's a sales, it's a form of marketing, a form of sales,
Mhm.
and a powerful one. It's
Yeah.
if you are looking to pitch, male or female, um, yourself to be on a podcast, that is a very powerful way to improve your brand,
Yeah.
and build your personal brand, but then document it. Create a page on your website that has the artwork and a link to you being interviewed here, and then the artwork and a link to you being interviewed here, and so on and so on and so on,
Mhm,
and make each one of those tell people in a sentence or two why this was an interesting episode and it was
mhm.
so fascinating to be on. And the podcast host will love you for that. That's
Yeah.
what they want.
Yeah. Well, I would just say from a PR perspective, and this is just something I've observed as having people on now as a host, but also being a guest, is a lot of guests don't even share the episode. They don't talk about it beforehand. They don't share it after. I mean, and I feel like, it's just a missed opportunity. It's just an oversight, and I mean, it's something that the host would appreciate, but honestly, it would behoove the guest. It would benefit the guest too. So,
Yeah, POP it. Proof of performance, man. Like, promote it a couple of times if you can in advance, and a couple of times on the backside of it. That's
mhm.
you're right. The host wants it, but it improves your personal brand. People think of you associated with that topic, and
Yeah.
that's why you're doing it.
Yeah, I'm like, why bother if you're if you're not even gonna like what's the point? I mean, I don't know. I mean, I know there are a lot of reasons, and I would even say you were talking about AI earlier, and again, with AI, driven search, we need to be showing up as many places as we can be, and it feeds the large language models and all of that. So there is that as well.
Mhm.
I know someone who said be on a podcast if there are two listeners, just it's going in there, it's getting fed in there. So it's still worth your time. It's like a good use of your time. So from a PR perspective, I feel like you don't want to turn down opportunities, but you also want to make the most out of every opportunity that you get. And I don't see people doing that
Well, it's
sometimes.
also the relationship you build with that host, right? You just don't know if 2 or 3 years down the road, maybe you're both doing something differently, but you'll remember that you shared that half hour, that hour together, and you built a rapport with one another. And I know Michelle is just like me, so to speak, right? That so you build that kind of relationship with someone.
Yeah.
Um, to
Yeah.
guesting, I guess we can go a bit down that path. So we want to talk about good pitches and bad pitches, right?
Yep. I did have that as a question. What do you think makes a good guest pitch? Because I know you said earlier you get a lot of poor pitches.
Oh my God. We get horrible. We've actually got a whole video on our YouTube channel, Stories and Strategies. Not that I'm promoting it. We've got a whole video where a couple of our producers talk about the sucky pitches
Oh,
that we get.
no.
And
I'll put the link up for that.
they always, God bless you, Stories and Strategies on YouTube. They begin with the opening, I won't swear, the opening BS. And it's, I heard your last episode that talked about chunky peanut butter, and I got me thinking about my CEO who works in carpet upholstery. I was like, what are you doing? All they've done is they've gone to your show notes. They found your podcast. They found they used Raphonic, first of all, to find your podcast. I'll just give you the tool. Then they've gone to your latest episode. They've looked at the first sentence and they've scalped the first, that's a bad word. They've lifted the first sentence and they've put that in the opening pitch, which half the time is in the wrong font to the rest of the email. I swear to God, it's in the wrong font. And then they just start pitching their CEO, which is pure template. It's pure template. We must, in the course of a week, we must get 60, 70 pitches across the podcast we've got. I swear to God, 50, 55 of them are just like that. They're that bad. They have not taken a nanosecond to listen to the podcast. They have no idea what it's about. They can't tell me anything about it. And they have not pitched a unique story idea. They've simply said that they're carpet upholstery CEO. Why that would be on a PR podcast, no idea, right? They've simply pitched their CEO to be on the podcast because they're spraying and praying. That's it.
Yeah.
I had a meeting earlier this morning with Lauren Passel. She's a dynamo in the podcast industry, runs Tink Media. And I've wanted to meet Lauren for a couple of years. And I see her at conferences. I never had the guts I'm just not good at like stepping in front of someone and say, hi, I'm Doug. It's not my way. But I had a chance to do a Zoom call with her, my business partner, Emily, and I. And so I spent time last night going through Lauren's website, reading her newsletters, and I found a conversational way. She had an entire newsletter piece talking about how she listens to podcasts in 1.8 times speed, which,
oh yeah,
oh my God, like blew me away, right? Because and so I had a mental note, work it in conversationally. About 10 minutes into the call, I mentioned to her, like, if I'm speaking too slowly, you want me to speak at 1.8 times speed, I'll do that. And so that tells Lauren, at the very least, this guy she doesn't know has spent some time with her content. So if you're making a pitch, to make an effective pitch, what do you have to do to convince the host that you have spent some time with their content? I can tell you straight up, using Raphonic and looking at the first sentence of the show notes and mentioning it off the top, not even remotely close. Listen to the episode. Be more qualitative than quantitative. The small podcasts, the ones that are desperately looking for guests, you might get on them. And you're right. Go on them. If they have 2 listeners, I agree with that. Do it.
Yeah.
But let's be honest. You want the podcast that has 5,000, 10,000, 100,000 listeners. That's what you want. Those podcasts, if you're spraying and praying, you got no prayer. So why you're spraying, I have no idea. You have no chance of getting in. And in fact, I see the same podcast pitchers from the same PR companies. And it's gotten to the point because I wake up to 50 or 60 emails.
Mhm.
I
Mhm.
don't even open the pitch.
Mhm.
I confess,
Mhm.
I'm swiping and deleting because it's from so and so. I already know their pitch is garbage. You're building your reputation.
Wow. That is now see, that is
Mm.
a nugget. I'm gonna have to write a post, a little, at least for LinkedIn, write a post about what you just said. And I mean, I know that's true. And I do think pitching podcasts is a little bit of a challenge, A, because there are so many, and the client will just say, well, get me on some podcasts. And I'm like, okay, well, what podcast are you, thinking
What
about? Or,
audience? Yeah.
and they sometimes they don't really know. They just think they want to be on podcasts, which okay. So then you had to do research. Well, for a long time, media databases didn't really do a very good job of including podcasts, and even now I don't really know that that's true. And then once you do even hone in on a podcast, and most of the time they want to be on the big ones, which again, it's kind of like being in the Wall Street Journal right out of the gate. Like you can kind of maybe ladder up to that, but you maybe won't start there. It's hard to find the right person to even pitch because it is like the production company that ends up being listed as a contact, and that's not really who's making the decisions about who the guests are. So
Mm-hmm.
I mean, yeah.
Yeah, relationships, right? Build relationships, and if you're sending out crappy pitches, you're not building them. You're
Yeah.
tearing them down. You're building walls for that producer. They're not going to like you at all.
Yeah. Well, I think it takes time and, yeah, just to, pull a list and cut and paste and spray and pray and like that's how a lot of people approach
Uh,
PR, and that is not
they
really gonna
do.
get you anywhere. It's really not.
They do. Yeah, you're right. I find Raphonic for me is the best tool, but Listen Notes is another one.
Say I don't know if I'm familiar with that.
Raphonic?
Uh-huh.
Yeah, REPHONIC. And there's a free version, which is, but for $100 a month, you can build a list and export it, and it is good.
Okay.
Yeah, we use Raphonic. We don't do a lot of pitching that way. We're a producer.
Right.
But we use that. The data in Raphonic, especially their audience estimations,
Mhm.
because there is no for podcasts unless you've put your podcast on OP3,
Mhm.
open source 3, which we have. Our numbers are very public. We play with an open hand.
Mhm. Mhm.
Most podcasts don't. They play with a closed hand and they don't divulge their numbers, and that's cool. Whatever you
Mhm.
choose. Raphonic does a pretty darn good job at estimating audiences.
Okay.
They're generally in the ballpark, so you can get an idea. Yeah, it was significantly different from Listen Notes. Listen Notes, there's a paid version of Listen Notes. And it seems Listen Notes seems more broadly known. And people will say, "Oh, I'm in the top 5%," but Listen Notes really has no clue about the size of your podcast. So, not to completely disregard it, but
Mhm.
Raphonic seems to sharpen things quite a bit. And then if you finally do get a guest spot, it's, working with yourself or working with your CEO, don't make this a salesy thing.
Right.
Right. Tell stories.
Yeah.
Understand the narrative that the host wants. And you and I have done this 5 times on my podcast I'll tell you, I want to focus with the first one we did, I think was snake oil in PR.
Yes.
Yeah. Remember that? Like
Yes.
5 years ago.
Yes. I
And
remember that. I think about that sometimes.
right. And we did this whole episode about is it too greasy, too snake oily, right? And you fit
Mhm.
it perfectly.
Mhm.
And so I wanted to have you back in the right amount of time. And then again, the second episode, which I don't remember off the top of my head. Second episode, third, fourth, and fifth. And it's because you
Mhm.
deliver to the narrative that I wanted for my audience.
Mhm.
Hopefully, I know my audience the best,
Mhm.
whatever quirky nature that I think my audience has, which is
Mhm.
probably in line with my quirky personality. And then to deliver on that narrative, deliver on the narrative for the host, deliver the piece they want. And if you've got calls to action, try to fit them in toward the end. Because the end of the episode, there'll be fewer listeners, first of all, but no one's got their phone in their hand during
Mhm.
the right? They
Mhm.
just so if you give CTAs in the
Mhm.
middle, you're hoping they remember it for later. But if you give some CTAs at the end of the episode, calls to action,
Mhm.
their phone is in their hand. They just might. They finished listening.
Mhm.
They might give you a couple minutes on your website, stuff like that.
Well, I just think it's about visibility too, and you never know which particular touch is gonna get to somebody,
Oh
or
yeah.
when you're gonna show up at the time they need you, or they know somebody who needs you. That's how I view a lot of this for people like me, or my clients, because it's like, well, I don't always wake up and need to buy something from this manufacturer, but you know what? In 6 months, maybe that does happen, or maybe I don't need PR today, but in 3 months, I might. So, I think it's just important to kind of, look at it as an overall, effort to market yourself or your business in the best way you can, in as many meaningful ways that reach your audience as you can. But,
Yeah.
obviously you can't do all the things well and do them all the time, and it's hard. So
And if you can, tell a story that's sticky, right? Tell a story that
Mhm.
makes they remember the topic because it's what's in it for them. But then maybe they remember you because you told this story that worked and that stuck with them.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, I was just thinking about how many, I get pitched by people who want to pitch me as a podcast guest, and I would say, again, they haven't really done their homework, as to, like, they act like you've never been on a podcast, or you wouldn't know how to go about yourself, or, like, I just think a lot of people are selling stuff to the snake oil point that it's not real, and I mean, if you are gonna hire somebody to pitch you as a guest, I would say make sure that you know that they know what they're doing. Ask for examples. Look and see, maybe they can give you some clients and you can go out and actually just do a search and see how many podcasts they've been on, which podcasts they are, that kind of thing. Cause I know people, I know some people are very good at it, and then other people I don't think are,
Mhm. That's
yeah.
actually really it. I get similar emails. That's a growing trend. There's a lot of
Yeah.
agencies, and that's only going to get bigger. There was a big one that just got bought out. Kitcaster just got bought
Okay.
out by a bigger company. So the bigger fish are eating the medium-sized fish now in that industry. And there's going to be more and more of that. They're like your agent, right? Pitching you to
Yeah.
be on a show. They become your BB from Frasier. Trying to get Frasier the best deal. I loved BB. I thought she was great. They become your BB, and they pitch you, and they tend to guarantee you a certain number of podcasts that you're going to be on,
Yeah.
and that's part of the deal. And of course,
Yeah.
the whole thing is that doesn't guarantee you listenership. And
No.
even if you get downloads, a download is 60 seconds, right? That's a 30-minute podcast. So maybe we shouldn't be measuring this stuff entirely by download anymore.
Yeah.
Maybe we should be looking at hours listened.
Yeah. No, I know people who are really good at it, and then I know people, again, who are I wouldn't trust. And I mean, you can do a little bit of homework, even, just Googling the person who contacted you, or the agency that contacted you, to find out, like, what their reputation is, because anybody can say anything, online or in an email, or, so we just really have to be skeptical and be, approaching it from that perspective, I think, because, again, the last thing I want is for someone to have a bad experience and then be like, "Oh, no, now, they think that, PR folks don't know how to pitch, and they don't know how to get me results, and so I I just
Mm,
yeah.
there's lots of that. There's lots, and most of the pitches that I get, pure crap. Pure crap. I don't know where they get this template from because they all look the same. They all have
Yeah,
this empty salutation opening paragraph, and I swear to God, Stories and Strategies, our podcast name, was in a different font, like 10% of the time. They've block copied it in. It's like, "Oh, what are you doing?"
Oh, well, is there anything else, that you want to share as we kind of wrap up here?
I guess just encouragement to do it. You know, I've talked a bit about we talked about how how hard it is, how much work it is. It's because most of my sales calls, when I have a potential new client, I kind of go through this because I'm trying to talk them out of it. And if they're really in it and they see not just the personal benefit, but they see the business benefit, they understand that there are KPIs and measurement attached to this and they have to follow it, then I'm willing to work with them. But encouragement to just do it, to host your own space. You can do it. Be patient, and don't demand too much of yourself or downloads right away, and do everything in a story format. So if you get to interview Little Red Riding Hood on your podcast, don't make the first question, "Oh my God, what was it like when the big bad wolf scared you?" The first question should be, "Tell me what you were doing that day when you were going to your grandma's place and what happened." Second question could be, "What happened to grandma's place? Oh my gosh." And third question should be, "What can we take from this? What can we learn from this about safety and maybe urban encroachment on a protected wolf, especially a talking wolf's habitat?" Something along those lines. And that's just story, man. That's crafting a good interview. Is once upon a time, suddenly there's something that disrupts the piece, and then what happened afterward. Pure storytelling format. Structure your interviews that way, and over time you will build audience.
Yeah. No, I think that you do that so well, and I think everybody listening or tuning in should be tuning into your podcast, Stories and Strategies, as well, and it's up there on the screen. If you have not checked it out, be sure and do that. And yeah, I'm a big fan of Doug's, and I'm
Likewise.
thrilled that you were here today, and I look forward to what you do next. So
I can't wait to have you on for episode 6 together.
I am looking forward to it.
Yeah, you're like our Jimmy Smits.
Well, I told you SNL has a 5-timers club, so I'm expecting like a T-shirt or like a.
You know what? Yes, we should be sending you a mug, like with your photo and a QR code. Why have we not done that?
I mean, on SNL they get like a robe and they get like champagne. They get.
All right. Okay. We're getting personal. Yeah, we could do it. And some strawberries, a little bit of chocolate.
Yeah.
We'll have a spa weekend together, Michelle.
Well, this was informative and fun, and I knew it would be. And I really appreciate you spending time with me. And yeah, I think anybody interested in podcasts should follow you for your wisdom, and then also listen to Stories and Strategies, your podcast. So all the links are up there. If anybody has any questions, I also put Doug's LinkedIn on there. Be sure and follow him there too. And I'm sure he'd always be happy to answer any questions you have, or if he can be of help, I'm sure he would be happy to do that.
Don't just follow on LinkedIn. Connect. Hit the connect button. I'll connect.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks everybody for being here. I will be back next week talking about how to jazz up boring industries when you're doing PR and comms. So looking forward to that. And I will see everybody then. Thank you so much.